Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Jesse, this is my garage, and today, well, we're gonna talk about if you're crazy enough to wanna buy a 300ZX, here's 5 things I would look for when buying a 300ZX in 2021. All right, well, obviously number 1 on the list is going to be the first thing you're going to see that's probably gonna attract you to the car is the exterior of the car. Depending on what kind of car you want to get into, if you want to get into a car that has aftermarket body panels, or if you want to get in a car that has OEM body panels, I mean, right there, really just the visual inspection of what you're going to be getting yourself into, because whatever the outside looks like will probably give you a pretty good idea on what we're going to see as we travel further into looking at this car. Or the exterior of the car, so that means what condition are the body panels in? Are they straight? Are they complete? Has the car been repainted? And if it has been repainted, how well has it been repainted, and is the paint holding up? Cracked or damaged bumpers, windshield, windows, all the stuff that just your eye is naturally going to see when you look at and what's going to attract you to the car. So whenever we look at something for the first time and we're excited about it, like you're excited about shopping for a new Z, and okay, boom, we see it, and of course everything online is going to look better than it might in person. I always like to say take a second look. So once we walk around the car and look and see what we have, and if you noticed any damage or any areas, go back and double check those, but also double check the areas that you probably just glanced by. Little door dings here and there, that's kind of to be expected, but what we're looking for is major body damage that's either gonna have to be replaced or major repair is gonna happen, and that can also lead to more damage that is underneath the body panels that we can't necessarily see. But if we have like alignment that's not going on, like I looked at a car one time that had got backed into right here by another car, and it had twisted the hole underneath, the bumper and the fender, where the lights wouldn't even line up to the bumper anymore on the opposite side of the car. So you got to take like account for that kind of stuff and see, you know, if there's a ding over here or there's a dent on one side, how did that dent happen? And then on the other side, did it twist anything, any of the metal or any of that stuff? So that's number 1 on the list, is just going to be the exterior. Look at it once and then look at it twice, and you know, a notepad doesn't hurt to jot little notes down while you're looking at any vehicle that you're going to buy. All right, so number 2 on the list is going to be, we looked at the exterior. Now we want to look, now the next thing I want to look at whenever I buy a car is I want to know what the interior looks like and how complete that interior is. Is there damage to the interior? Are we missing pieces? Are switches broken? Is the door panel hanging off? Has somebody been in there? Is there an aftermarket stereo? All this type of stuff is going to start to give you a picture of how this car has been treated in the past and what trouble you might find in there. Now, these cars are 30 years old, and an aftermarket stereo probably is, you're gonna probably find one in there. And a stereo is pretty easy to wire in, but it could start to give you, did they know what they're doing? Because you would be surprised on the amount of stereos that I've seen that are wired in, but are wired in so terribly. So that'll kind of give you an idea, has the wiring been messed with? Or is it a stock stereo, which is a plus. Even if you take out the stock stereo, I highly recommend keeping the stock stereo to put it back in there when you go to sell it, because you'd be surprised at people that want that stuff to be complete. And then also like door panel clips. How well are all the interior secured? Is the clips broken? Have the door panels been removed and then the clips are broken and then not put back? So we have loose and sagging door panels. Does it rattle when the doors close? And these cars are notorious for how the window system is, and how since it has like just a weird kind of door frame, has the one pillar on the side, and then the window has 2 rollers that go into that. Those are notorious to go out and make a rattling and a clinking sound. So go ahead and like shut the doors, see if there's any popping or anything on the doors. Did the doors shut well? You could also take the door and see if the door pins are bad by trying to lift the door up and down. If it's solid, that's good. If it's got some play and it's loose, I mean, that needs new door pins. And these doors are heavy, so after over the years, probably needs new pins and bushings. But then also, is everything working on the interior? You want to see the gauge cluster works. These cars are notorious for the gauge clusters to go bad. You'll see like a speedometer and a tach that isn't working. And then if your speedometer and your tachometer, well, if your speedometer isn't working, then your odometer isn't going to be working. And if your odometer isn't going to be working, then it's not going to have the correct mileage or accurate mileage for the vehicle. And one way you can also tell this is if you run a Carfax on the VIN, like we did on this car. So this car has a bad gauge cluster. And I looked on and did a Carfax before I bought it. So you should definitely do your due diligence on that. And I noticed that it said mileage discrepancy. Now what happens if you go get your car smogged or have any work done and they log the mileage on the car and put it into some data bank, into the huge data bank of cars that Carfax pulled all of its data from, and the mileage hasn't changed in the last few years or whenever it is, then that's going to be a mileage discrepancy. And it's, at this point in the car's life, it's probably not a huge deal. Now if you see a car with 13,000 miles on it, yeah, we want the right mileage on that. But if you're getting into the 200,000 mile range, it's already exempt from any type of mileage records because it's out of its service life period. And then of course, what are the condition of the seats, how much. So once we take all this information in the interior, then we have to kind of start doing some calculation on what it's going to take to get it back to where it needs to be, or is it a good starting platform for the money that we're going to spend. All right, once we've looked at the exterior of the car and we have a good handling on the interior of the car, I like to look underneath the car because now it's going to start telling some more stories. And we want to look underneath the front bumper right here, just back. And for one, I want to know if all the splash guards are going to be complete or not. If they're not, that means someone's been there, ripped it off, haven't replaced it. So if they haven't replaced the splash guards or they took the splash guards off, it's going to give us a good indication on what else we're going to see. We also want to look at the front of the engine for little drops of oil because that's going to imply that the front main seal's leaking. And if the front main seal's leaking, that means the 120K service isn't done. And that goes back to the timing belt and maintenance, which we'll talk to a little bit. But right now we're just trying to paint a picture to see what is actually going on and get as much information as we can. So we're gonna look at the front of the engine to see if there's any moisture or any oil droplets coming from the front of the engine. That would be our front main seal. And then we also wanna look where the engine and the transmission meet up and see if there's any moisture, any oil droplets forming, and that will tell us if the rear main seal is leaking. Now the rear main seal, you'll have to separate the engine from the transmission to get to that seal. So that's quite the job. And it's pretty labor intensive, but it needs to be done. This car actually needs a rear main seal. And I'm just trying to decide what we're gonna do to do it because it's an auto and we want to do a 5-speed swap and a turbo motor. And we're all kind of trying to figure out what the plan is for this car. But I knew all this stuff going into it and I knew it was going to get addressed at some point. So while we're looking at this, you need to think, what is my end goal with the car and what is it going to take to get it where I want it to be? Is it going to be worth it? Because you can always walk away and keep shopping. Don't get too excited and get too ahead of yourself. So we've looked at the front of the motor, the underneath of the car, look towards the front of the motor. We've looked towards the rear of the motor. We're looking for any oil droplets or condensation forming. Now, while we're under there, we also want to look at the steering rack and the 2 steering boots that are on the end of the rack where our tie rods come out of. And we want to look for any damage to those boots, if they're ripped, if they need replaced, and then also, is it leaking? Because that's going to say if our rack and pinion is bad and the seals inside of that are bad, that's our power steering, and we're going to be leaking power steering fluid. So we either are going to have to rebuild that rack or get a replacement rack and replace it. Now, to do either one of those, how this engine sits, you actually have to separate the engine from the subframe in the front because the steering rack goes in between there and the oil pan sits around it. And that brings me to the next thing, the oil pan. See if there's any dents, dings, cracks, if it's leaking anything. Now, if it's just leaking from the oil drain plug, they probably changed the oil, didn't put a new crush washer. That's easy. But if there's any dents or dings, or if the oil pan itself is actually cracked, then we need a new oil pan. Once again, to change the oil pan, you have to separate the engine from the subframe because the oil pan wraps up around the subframe and the steering rack. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to get to just while the motor is in the vehicle. Now, you don't have to necessarily get the car up, jacked up. I have little ramps that I'll use, and you can just drive the car up onto the ramps, and you can just get under there with a little flashlight and look. You'll be able to see any of these items good enough to tell if something's going on there. But also look at the transmission where the drive line mates up to the transmission tail. See if there's any leakage there. There's a seal there that can always go, can always go bad if it's an automatic transmission. The automatic transmission pan, see if it's leaking from that. And then of course on our rear end, our differential has gear oil in the differential. We want to look for any moisture coming out of there, anything leaking. Those will all give us a nice view of underneath the car. And while we're actually underneath the car, let's look for any rust and major frame damage. Now this car has 2 frame rails that run down the middle of it, and people jack the car up on those frame rails. Right now I'm gonna tell you, do not do that because you will damage your frame rails. Do not jack those up. Those are not jack points. So look for any damage to that. Number 1 is gonna be rust. So if you're in like the northeast part of the country or the part of the country, Canada, any place that's gonna be wet, have a lot of snow, they use road salt, that's really where you wanna look for rust. It's gonna be apparent. Another place to look for rust is on the wheel wells. If you looked at some of our other videos, you've seen when I took out the fender liners, all the dirt and debris that gets just trapped in there, that will be a place to create rust. So on the wheel wells, where the wheel well meets the unibody of the car, we want to look for rust in any of those places, bubbling paint. So that'll take care of the underneath of the car. We're looking for any leaks in any of the major systems that's gonna have a leak. Then we're gonna look for any rust that might be underneath there. And then of course, completeness. Like I said, the splash guards, exhaust completeness. You should be able to kind of see the exhaust if it's been modified, if cats are missing, any of that type of stuff. All right, so we've looked at the exterior, we've looked at the interior, looked underneath the car for any leakage or damage. Now we want to actually get this hood popped open and take a peek at what's going on under the hood. There's going to be a whole bunch of different entry levels for these cars. I mean, I bought a $2,000 300ZX right here. Kind of knew what I wanted to look for, and I knew how messy it could be, but I wanted something that was complete. Now these cars have been around for a while. They've probably been through a few people's hands, and they're tuner cars. So people can start wrenching on stuff, and it's a good car to learn some mechanic skills and learn how to wrench on stuff. But it's also a good car to make some mistakes on your mechanic skills, and somebody will send it off to the next one. So when I look under the hood on something like this car, I want to look for completeness. I want to look to see how much stuff could have potentially been tampered with. I want to look to see if there's extra wires running around that shouldn't definitely not be there, or splices into the harness where someone's trying to get power from somewhere to hook up their underglow lights or aftermarket alarm systems and speakers and who knows, amps, all kinds of other stuff. So we want to look and see what doesn't belong there. So there's kind of a two things. We're looking for something that's out of place, and then we're looking for stuff that needs attention that hasn't got attention. For maintenance, we want to look for a timing belt sticker. It looks something like this. And we want to look to see when the mileage was, and the mileage, compare that to the odometer reading and see how many mileage is on the last timing belt that's in there. But besides the mileage, I also want to know how long ago the timing belt was done, because just because it has a certain amount of miles, it could have been 15 years ago. And a 15-year-old belt is still out of spec for what Nissan calls for this engine to have on there. But that'll at least give you a good idea on maintenance and what's going on, and also bringing it back to that timing belt, because this is the #1 issue that is going to make you be able to drive and enjoy this car, and the car engine fail on you probably is going to end up in the junkyard or parted out. Is the timing belt issue. I can't stress that enough, because it's an interference engine, it's a 30-year-old car, and it probably hasn't been done in a long time. Unless you're buying a car that's a lot more money, don't buy a $2,000 300ZX if you aren't going to tear it all apart and put it back together. Spend a little bit more money, make sure everything else is done, and you'll get it at a good deal. Now we're underneath the hood. We'll go ahead and fire up the car and just hear and see how everything's running. Is it shaking a lot? Is it running smoothly? Is it idling smoothly? Does it have a high idle? Is it surging? That would like be a vacuum leak. Kind of give you an idea of what's going on, and you can watch the engine operate and see how it's operating while it's running and while you're looking under the hood. But what we're looking under the hood for is stuff that doesn't belong and stuff that probably needs attention. And you can look and see, like underneath the intake manifolds, should be able to just kind of peek, take a flashlight, peek around there, see if there's any oil coming out of the valve covers, because if it needs maintenance, the valve covers probably need done. They're a little bit of a pain to do because you have to take off the intake manifold. Also, while we're looking under the hood, we want to be looking at the lines, all the rubber lines that are under there. I mean, from the radiator hose to the vacuum lines to your intake tubes, to our fuel lines, definitely our fuel lines. Are they all original? Are they all 30 years old? Have they been replaced? You should be able to see, and even if they've been replaced, were they replaced 15 years ago? Well, that was half of its lifespan. It's been another 15 years since then. So stuff probably does need to go replaced. Everything on a vehicle will wear out at some point. That's it. That's the honest truth about this. Everything will wear out at some point. Everything has to be replaced at some point, period. You're done. I don't care if you rebuild this car all today and you don't drive it that much. All this rubber, all the plastics get brittle, rubbers age, everything deteriorates, fluids go bad even if you don't drive it. Timing belts get age on them and aren't as reliable as they were. So that is another thing that's huge with these cars, is everybody loves the idea of a 300ZX, and they are a freaking awesome car, but everything ages, everything gets older. Everything needs to be replaced. Vacuum lines break, especially vacuum lines that are inside of a hot engine bay. This is a V6, you know, it's tight in there. Everybody knows how tight the inside of a 300ZX engine bay is. And all that stuff gets heat soaked and heat cycled, and over time gets brittle and breaks and cracks and can lead you to problems, which isn't a huge deal because replacing vacuum lines and rubber lines isn't terrible. It's just a process that you might not want to put the time into, because you just might want to enjoy your vehicle and do what you like to do on the side. I just happen to like to wrench, so it's not a big deal to me. I have all the stuff here. I've built it up over the years, but it might not be something that you want to do. You might just want to enjoy the car. So take into account for all that stuff that's underneath there too. The more money you're paying for one of these cars, I would say the more you should expect to see the maintenance done and stuff like that, like just little stuff like vacuum lines, fuel lines, all that stuff being taken care of, replaced, and in good operating condition. Now, the less money you pay, be ready to go replace that stuff, hunt down little small crazy problems, and learn how to work on your car. It'd be a good experience. All right, so the next thing on there, we've looked at the exterior, we've looked at the interior, we've looked underneath the car, we've looked on the engine bay, we've heard it running. Now let's actually drive this thing. If you've made it this far, you might think you want to buy this car, drive it. If you think that this car is just a ticking time bomb and you want nothing to do about it, leave right now. Do not drive the car. Do not take any reliability to anything that might happen when you go out and drive this car, because if somebody hits you or something, you just don't even want to be in that mess. If you're seriously thinking about buying the car, drive the car, and then drive it, see how it goes. Do some stops, some short stops, some long stops, see how the brake is responding to you. Is it mushy? Does it feel good? Is the clutch pedal, how does the clutch pedal feel? Is the clutch engaging? Is the gears grinding? Is the automatic transmission shifting like it should? Check out the lights, make sure the lights are working. That's kind of on the interior, but now that you're driving, you know, you have turn signals, brake lights, fog lights, headlights. You can go ahead and go through all those. While I was driving it too, if I didn't check this on the interior, check the windows, how they go up and down. Turn off your stereo. Do not need to listen to the stereo while you're driving. You want to hear how the car is performing, any road noise, any suspension noise, any of all that stuff. And like I said, take a friend, take a family member, take a piece of paper and a pen and jot down stuff as it comes up, because you're going to be looking at the car, you're going to be driving the car, you're going to be talking to the seller, you're going to be trying to get information from them, you're going to be trying to process all this information and be super excited about a 300ZX that you're probably going to buy, or you might not buy. So we want to check out brakes. I want to know about the clutch. I want to know about how the transmission shifting, automatic or manual. I want to know how the electronics are working on the inside while we're driving it. That brings us back to our gauge cluster. This is a good chance to check out the speedometer on the gauge cluster working. Keep an eye on that odometer too, make sure that's working. Is the tachometer working? And then, you know, is our lights working correspondingly with all the electronics? When we flip our lights on, does it dim? When we flip our turn signals on, does it show up on the gauge cluster? And so on and so forth. And then also take it on the freeway, get a little bit of speed under your belt. You don't have to go 100, but go 65. See how the car handles. Does it shake? If it shakes, there's the suspension components. You got your wheel bearings, ball joints, bad bushings, bent controller arms, all that stuff. You just have to remember this is a 30-year-old car. And even if you paid $10,000, $15,000 for one of these cars, that's totally fine. It's 30 years old, that's okay. They're collector cars, but we want to make sure they're in the collector car shape that they're gonna be in, and that you're gonna not overpay for something that you're gonna have to put a lot of money into. So we just wanna be thorough, take our time, don't be too excited because it's too easy to be too excited. And look for any of those shakes, vibrations, see how it handles over speed bumps. Does it feel like a boat? Does it feel tight? Does the suspension bottom out? Any of that stuff. So enjoy your test drive and then put all these factors in together to kind of come up with what you think the fair value for this car is. All right, so now we went through all 5 items on this, what you're gonna do when you're gonna buy a 300ZX in the year 2021, what you're gonna look for, and what is going to make sense for you. So put all these items in together, see what it looks like for you, see if it's gonna be too much of a project or if it's gonna be just the amount of project, or it's not gonna be any project because it's already all done. The car's ready for you to drive and enjoy. But thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully it was helpful. Hit me down in the comments below with any questions or experiences that you had when you're buying your 300ZX. Follow me on Instagram at Build Theory. Go ahead and shoot me a DM on there. Tell me what's going on in your life. And then support the garage. Go over to Patreon at Jesse's Garage. Kick down a couple bucks. Help support and create so we can keep creating cool content for you guys. And then I'll send you out a retro JDM sticker myself just to say thank you. Plus there's other merch tiers on there too. Go check it out. Get yourself some JDM cool shirt, yo. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the subscribe, hit that like button so other people can find this, and I will see you next time.